There we go. It'll go now. That was all me. Just kidding. Take two.
Take
Okay,
two.
so give it about 20 seconds.
All right. And then I will share the hell out of that link.
Let's see what happens.
Okay, we got a feed. Got a live feed. Okay, sharing.
And you might want to mute yourself. Hi, everybody. Here's the intro.
I listened to this while I was working in the yard today. It was great.
God, what were you doing? Demolition?
No, some weeds, gardening. Gardening.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
Remember, everybody can hear you.
That's okay. Everyone, Carl Gardens.
Yeah, Carl Gardens, he's got a weed garden up in Harrogate.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
Look at all these albums flying
Yeah.
around. Some of the things that Dave Allen's worked on.
Oh, I like the video, Arisha. Well done with their little Chameleons logo.
Thank you.
Jelly and
Had fun with
Orphan.
it. Yeah, that Shelley and Orphan record cover's great.
I was the first producer to hit the floor with the Lars.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. They went through about 20.
Oh, my God.
Quite interesting. Well, I don't know if you think the mental illness is interesting. It's bonkers. Something like the music business for condoning that sort of behaviour. If it's making money. Hi everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Interesting the delay, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Let's see. There we go. All right. Welcome. This is Arusha from Push, a Cure fan documentary. And I am here with my co-host, Carl Tapia from The Cure Forever.
Hello, everyone.
And that Carl Tapia. And we are here today to talk to the one, the only, the amazing David M. Allen. And we're going to talk about his release in the past, amongst other things. And to kick us off, Andy, producer and manager, is that right? Manager of them?
Manager of Dave Allen? I don't think so. God, he's managing me.
All right. Well, why don't you kick us off?
Damaging.
Yeah, Dave taught me that the only good manager is a damager. So,
Damager, I love it.
Yeah. Managers have been damaging their artists for decades now. But yeah, hello. We are very thrilled to put out yet another Dave Allen record. This time it's a 16-minute. There's so many ways of describing it. It's obviously Dave will start explaining what it is, but it's I call it a 16-minute drone fest, which is a compliment because I love drone music.
Yeah.
And Dave created it on one piece of gear. We dropped it last week. It's just out, and Dave's done a video for it, which we'll be releasing in a short while, and it will be eventually available on a single-sided 12-inch, which has a laser-etched B-side. Very pretty and very limited.
A
So
laser
yeah,
etched.
it's
Wait, a laser etched.
yeah, because I mean, you can get about 16 minutes on one side of vinyl without it being too compressed and losing dynamic. And we'd be very foolish to cut the track into two and put it onto an A side and a B side. So we thought, why don't we just make it pretty and put it in a PVC slipcase? So for all those people that buy vinyl and don't actually unwrap them and play them, at least they can put it on their shelf and they'll have something nice to look at on the B side. I suppose.
Oh, that's
Nice.
cool.
Cool.
Very cool. So back to the track, man. How did this all start? What's a Lexicon 480L, Dave?
Well, just before we plunge into that, I'm not actually getting the YouTube feed. So if there are questions that come up in that you would like to relay to me, that would be good. So just as we go on, I'm not getting any of that. Otherwise, I'll spend the whole time going, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, so-and-so, whatever. So if you could do a bit of managing there, if there is anybody foolish enough to ask questions. We don't know. I suppose it goes back to around kind of I suppose 86 or 87. During that period, when people mixed records, the general scene in England or in London about mixing records is we would have loads and loads of outboard gear. By that point, there was quite a lot of outboard gear. Outboard gear is the sort of stuff that you use to augment the mix. You've got all the instruments recorded. Sometimes they have all the effects on them in the mix, but sometimes they don't. So you would have various things like delay lines, echo chambers, phasers, flangers. No one really kind of knows what they are, but all this kind of by the kind of mid to late 80s, there was quite a palette, let's put it that way, of effects. You went back to the early 60s, people were sticking sounds into stairwells, that's like Phil Spector, or into specially designed rooms, tiled rooms to get reverb, that's like, say, the Beatles. And then towards the late sort of 60s, various kind of, with the advent of the chip, you got kind of things like phasers and flangers, and you got digital reverbs, artificial reverbs. By the sort of late 80s, these had kind of developed up, and sort of in the mid 80s, I was like often renting. Studios often couldn't afford like things like Lexicons, so you'd end up renting them for the mix. They could be really kind of powerful, these effects. For instance, Oh Superman by Laurie Anderson is a loop that's been trapped in I can't remember what type of Lexicon it is. It's kind of an earlier one, but it's just a loop that runs through the whole track, and Oh Superman is basically kind of runs around that. So it's not an instrument per se, but that was the kind of start of sampling, which was the start of, you know, dance music and everything that we kind of know from the late 80s into the 90s. Now, kind of at some point, Lexicon made a machine called a 480, which they called a 480L. I don't really know why they called it 480. I'm sure that it's probably there in the literature, but I'm not very didactic about things like that. But the advantage of it was that it was basically two machines in one. So you could have a machine A with sort of, let's say, a room effect, and then machine B with the effect of a church in one box, which meant that when you were stacking up instead of having like a vast, basically half the space. So
well,
you could
actually, can I interrupt you and ask
Hmm.
you to break that down? Because I feel like a lot of the people listening are not super techy, and what you said is really interesting. So it's just so you guys know, like I looked it up, and the lexicon, it looks like a calculator to me. It looks like a little tiny little thing, right? So this tiny
Hmm.
little beige 1986 thing, which I put on my stories, you're saying had this power to, if like on Disintegration, for example, you wanted to have a church effect on here and then a room effect and then another effect, it's in one
Yeah, there's
machine.
a big, yeah,
Uh,
it's all really from the period of time because it's sort of the PC did sort of exist around that time, but people were still working around the idea of having a terminal. So you would have a terminal with a mainframe somewhere, and the Lexicon was like that. So off to the side there is a big box, like about so big, if you can get that. And then the handheld remote that you've got in your video, which is called a LARC, which stood for Lexicon Alphanumeric Remote Control.
Oh.
That's how you would kind of configure it and use the sound. So all of those sliders that are on it are kind of live, and what you would do is you would get a static effect. You would get something that when you put, like, let's say the snare into it, it went bush, or it went doof, or whatever it did. So you wouldn't be kind of really changing the parameters as the song went on. But when you got onto some of the more elliptical, weird programs, they kind of start having a life of their own, because if you put a sound in at the start of the song, by the time you're 3 minutes in, it's sort of stacked up because there's a feedback loop. So the kind of sound becomes it travels, it becomes richer. There's nothing there in the beginning. The sound starts, then the effect comes in, and then the effect is looped back on itself. So sort of by the time you get to the end of a track, you've often got like a far kind of richer, more dense effect. It's quite hard to work with because obviously it can kind of swamp the track. But I guess I've been thinking about this, and because I did a lot of 12-inch mixes with when I started with Martin Russian, like all the Dare remixes, and then I carried on kind of doing those type of dub mix 12 inches until kind of like 1984, 85, when I got really bored with them. Or I don't know if I got bored with them, or I got kind of hooked around the idea of trying to make the perfect track. Rather than kind of, so when I came to kind of like, people would say, well, do you want to do a 12-inch of this? I'd go, oh no, because it's difficult enough trying to make a perfect single. I don't really want to deconstruct it, let somebody else deconstruct it. All of my imagination's gone into trying to make it as great as it could be in one piece. I'm not interested in deconstructing it and presenting it in any other way, because I've put all my brain into this one piece of stuff. So while you were kind of messing about and trying to get the effects and trying to get these kind of things manageable, you would end up messing about with it. And feedback, which is like a totally critical thing in all rock music, pretty much everything we've listened to, from, well, Rumble by Link Ray, there's a kind of feedback going on that makes everything exciting. It's when that's how, I mean, even digital memory is a type of feedback, he says, not knowing whether that's true or not.
Well, actually, Silverbox, when you're talking, just before we get into whatever we're about to get into, Silverbox is asking for a clarification when you're talking about these different things. They say like a time delay or like an echo, question mark?
Yeah, exactly, like a time delay. Well, a time delay is like where you have certain number of milliseconds, or a time, and then the same signal comes back, which is like kind of like and the word echo, as from the Greek. He says, not knowing if that's true. But echo, you know, that like where you shout off a mountain and you just get the same thing back.
Right.
It probably is from the Greek anyway. Most things are. And then reverb is a completely different thing. Reverb is the attempt to simulate a space. So say you might have a program that has, you put a sound into it and it purports to sound like Carnegie Hall or
Right.
Concertgebouw, whatever that is. I think it's a place in Germany. These are places that are famous for doing classical music because the space, the reverb, the hall lends itself naturally or wonderfully to complementing the sound of an orchestra. So there's delay and then there's reverb. Now with things like, as it got more complicated, you've got delay and reverb at the same time. And that's actually really quite old because that's basically what Sam Phillips discovered, the guy who recorded Elvis. He discovered slapback echo, which is basically a delayed signal, then going into a reverb. So that's kind of like John Lennon's favourite vocal sound, and Sam Phillips invented that. So, but that was using tape. Same as John Martin kind of used a lot of that sort of stuff on a machine called an Echoplex, or like a Watkins Copycat. There's a few of those sort of things which were kind of guitarist tools, or yeah, they're big guitarist tools. Possibly some keyboard players use them. These all ended up in digital boxes in studios, and you'd be using kind of a multiplicity of them.
Then
when you set up very long, go on. Sorry.
Oh, just Silverbox is saying sounds like Eno shimmer created with the AMS 1580. I don't know what that means. Do you know what that means? AMS 1580. Uh-oh, Dave, you're muted.
Not ringing a bell.
Dave.
Yeah, Dave, your mic's off.
Uh-oh.
Dave.
Your mic's
We got a
off.
thumbs up from him. Oh, you can hear. I think you can hear us, but
yeah, you dropped out. Can you check to see if you knocked the mute button?
Check your mic.
Well, it's not the mic. It's got to be something.
Maybe
Well, the sound he keeps on touching on his.
Oh,
there you go.
There it is.
Yeah. There it is.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly, that sort of thing. Yeah. AMS were kind of an interesting company because they were based in Burnley. It's an odd place to base a groundbreaking audio thing. They were the first people who came up with locking samplers, and they were the first people that came up with something. Well, I saw between them and the Lexicon that I mentioned for Laurie Anderson. The 1580 would be able to lock a small sample of sound in, which you could then trigger initially just off the front button and then off of an external signal. That was really the start of sampling, but yeah, I don't know about shimmer.
Let's get to how you discovered that you could make music with the Lexicon.
Well, I'm not sure that well, a lot of the stuff let me think. When you basically do like the dub mixes that we were doing in the early 80s, often revolved around having very long feedback chains of delays. So you would have a kick drum going in that would be just repeating. And if you stop the tape, it would just go. So you'd have boom, 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 boom. You'd have so much delay that it would be phasing out. I think it was kind of easier on analog machines to get a very, very long travel. In other words, like a long delay that lasts for absolutely bloody ages, was actually easier on analog machines than it is on kind of digital machines nowadays. I don't know why that is. I don't even know if that's true. Maybe I just haven't got a knack for doing it. I've only been working kind of digital stuff for 25 years, so maybe another 5 years and I'll crack the kind of secret of it. I don't know. I mean, I kind of like sort of when we started, when Andy said, "Oh, I'd really like to put this out," I sent it to him kind of just because I did a whole load of jams in the early noughties. Well, I called them jams. It was just like me fucking about with it, just trying to, and I was recording it as well, because that's the kind of guy I am. And I sort of thought, oh, these are really kind of weird and interesting pieces on their own. When Andy said, "Oh, we should really put this out. It's really interesting." It is kind of I did about 30, and it is kind of my favourite one. So I suppose in terms of being ambient music or ambient noise, it's kind of something where I can kind of go, "Oh yeah, this bit's coming up now, and this bit's coming up now." I can't actually kind of remember specifically how I did it because it's not really music, so you can't say, "Well, I played a minim of C and then I changed and did a minim of D or something like that." You couldn't write a score for it.
You couldn't write a score for it?
No, you couldn't. Well, you couldn't. I have no idea how you would write.
What does that
I mean,
mean
you're
to
sitting
somebody?
with like.
What does that mean to somebody who doesn't know what are you talking about? What's a score?
But basically, the musical notation, like when you look at sheet music, you have
like
on the staves, which are the lines that go across, which the notes sit on, and they're arranged in the order of an octave. So basically, logically, if this tune is going up, you'll see the notes going up the page, and then if the melody's going down, you'll see them going down again. Just to answer what Dave's just said, I will be giving it. I'm going to be feeding it into either Sibelius or one of the transcribe. There are now there's now software because obviously we will be putting this track down at all the authors' rights collecting societies, so that it will eventually make 80 cents when it's streamed. There's software. In the olden days, you had to pay a musical transcriber. That's a guy or a girl that sits behind a desk with a pen, literally writing your track out in freehand, and then it goes to it gets photocopied, and it goes to the rights collection societies, so that royalties can be accrued and accounted for. But now you can do it on software. So I'm going to have a real bit of fun probably next week by feeding it into either Sibelius or something and seeing what they come up with. Because obviously there are tones of notes and music on there. So should be fun. It will probably look like a drunken bird with ink on its feet has kind of walked across.
There's your artwork.
Some empty musical stage.
There's the artwork. Yeah, I love that visual. Oh my goodness. Well, one of the questions that I have, it's like, so I understand, this device, it's a box that itself, like, it doesn't really do much of anything until you put something into it. It's adding an effect to something. Now to create the notes and the sounds, I don't know if I missed that being covered, but what was being fed into this to create these soundscapes?
Okay, there's two possible explanations for this. I'm not quite sure which they are. One is you have a send that sends sounds into these kind of reverb machines or effects boxes. You have a send. That send has noise in it.
Okay.
But the box on its own will go to plus over 100% feedback.
Okay.
In other words, within itself, it can kill itself.
Got it.
Yeah, because
Wait,
it's kind of like
what?
over.
Wait a minute. Hold on. My
So-
brain just went.
So devices.
Yeah, me too. Yeah,
So
it's kind of weirdly interesting. Basically, even though there's nothing going, even though it's designed to have a sound go into it, for it to create an effect to go with that sound. So, for instance, you put a snare in it, and it's supposed to take the snare from sounding like it's in a dry room just on its own into being in a church, right? But you can, on some of the programs in it, without any sound going into it, without any trigger, you can make it feedback on itself because it's got more feedback than it really needs to have. Yeah, it's over spec.
okay.
I think the other thing is that, like all analog circuitry has a small amount of noise, and maybe it's just grabbing onto that initially, but I don't really think so. I just think it's just a bit of a funny. Once you've got the kind of signal going in, once you've got a electricity going around the circuit, where you've got loads to play with.
Oh wow, that's a really cool visual. Once you've got a lot of
basically on the little,
so cool.
Well, on the little video that I did towards the end, I do show that I'm actually on the. Christ, this is fucking. It sounds really complicated, but it's actually not. In fact, but so I'm sending out of send 1 into the Lexicon 480L. The Lexicon 480L is returning back to the desk, and then I am taking the return of the Lexicon 480L and I'm sending that back to the Lexicon 480L using send 1. So I've got, not only have I got the feedback loop within the Lexicon 480L, I've also got a feedback loop coming from the desk. Now those two things are different. They react differently. One is completely digital, it's 14-bit digital. That's the internal one in the Lexicon, and the other one is an analog feedback loop, which will act kind of differently.
So I have two questions on YouTube that are related to this.
Yeah.
But they're paired. One is that like tuning an amp up to 11, and 2, self-oscillating on itself, I guess, does it have modulation?
Yeah. Certain programs, the program in the past is really a backward reverb program. It's not really like turning an amp up. Well, turning an amp up to 11, it's probably the equivalent of, it's Nigel Tufnell if he was a sound engineer. Yeah.
I don't know who that is.
Nigel Tufnell's the guitarist in Spinal Tap, who's got an amp
okay.
that goes right. It does, his volume knob doesn't go up to 10; it goes up to 11.
But these go up to 11,
One louder.
In it, yeah, louder, yeah, one louder, yeah, that's it, yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
And
But the whole thing is just, yeah, go on.
Oh, just also for the people that are their brain is going, because there's definitely like musicians on here that are getting it, and there's some people that are like, what? I do want to drop in there that this in the blurb that when you describe it, you say you used it on Disintegration and in specific songs. We can get into that now or not, but I do, we got to hook these Cure fans in. You know what I'm saying? Just I got to be real. That because when I listen to that, I don't know how that machine, like when I read that this machine is what you used on Disintegration, how is it linked to Prayers for Rain and Disintegration? I'm completely interested in the answer.
Yeah. Well, this is an interesting thing, isn't it? Because lots of people have just been to see The Cure on tour, haven't they? They just toured Europe and they toured America. And they're touring with non-original guitars non-original amps, non-original drummers. One can say that Robert's voice is still the same, which it kind of isn't really. It's still amazing, but it's not the same.
Mm-hmm.
But all those people who are going and enjoying it, they're enjoying the song, aren't they? They're enjoying the song. It's not the same sound as it was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Now, the stuff that I did all that time ago, the ident of it, when you first ever heard Cure stuff, you heard it with all of the machines that we used to dress it up. Probably Simon was still using PV bass amps. So was Robert. Now they're not. I mean, it's probably Ampeg, but they weren't using any of that sort of stuff. All the reverbs are all different. The song has sort of moved on, but when you want to remember back to when you first ever heard the definitive version, it's almost like Baroque music, where there's that whole movement for playing Baroque music on instruments of the time. So I kind of think it's quite interesting because all of this stuff gives it a sense of time and place. So, like when you listen to Disintegration, the album, or the song, you think, oh God, it sounds like that because it sounds like that because it sounds like that at the time. If you were to mix it now with, you could probably simulate a similar mix, but it wouldn't sound the same. If it was done using Ableton Push, I mean, it just wouldn't sound the same, would it? But one's identification as a fan goes to when you first ever heard that stuff. And you first ever heard that stuff where the music was being dressed by all these various enhancements, machines that enhance the sound. But you're still going to see the concerts. It's still the Cure. It still sounds the same stuff because the songs are great, the words are the same, the performances are the same. It doesn't have the same sound that it had 30 years ago. Even if you saw them 30 years ago, you'd kind of go, how could you ever track,
Well,
Madison Square Gardens 30 years ago and go, oh, it sounds exactly the same as 30 years ago, because live music just disappears, doesn't it? It just disappears. There's no record of it. Recorded music, it's just there forever. So consequently, that's why there's so much angst about it. But I think it gives it a sense of time and place. So
yeah, no, it's fascinating.
Yeah,
it's fascinating. I mean, even the visual, of your production studio with what now I know is the what did you say it was the
Lexicon alphanumeric remote
I
control.
thought it was the whole thing. I'm like, oh, it's like a calculator. That's so cool.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
It
totally is like the calculator. Yeah.
Yeah, and it just is that. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I was just gonna.
A general. Sorry.
Go ahead, Andy.
Sorry, a general point about. Dave quite clearly explained what reverb is. It's an effect that gives space to a mix, and it's one of the first effects that was ever used on recorded music. Now, the interesting thing, which links up to what Dave's just said, is that anybody, whether they're a tech head or a musician or just somebody that enjoys music off the radio or in their record collection, anybody of any age can date music because of reverb. That's how important reverb is to recorded music, because it's been through so many different physical manifestations. Like as Dave said, Abbey Road, when the Beatles were recording, their reverb was literally an old air raid shelter with steel columns, hollow columns in it. Then you've got like spring reverb, which is basically a wooden box with loads of physical springs where the signal goes in one end, that's the music, and comes out the other, and basically travels down springs that kind of resonate and vibrate within a box, giving the space of that box. then we get into analog machines that are built with transistors and the odd silicon chip, and it's like synthesized reverb. And then in the 80s, digital reverb, and now obviously it's a little 28K or 28 megabyte plug-in program on your Mac going into whatever software you're using. So anybody who's not a musician can, if you think of like a Kylie Minogue track from 1987 or a Rick Astley track, you can date it to the 80s because they're using that particular 80s reverb. And when you listen to sort of, as you said, John Lennon's slapback vocals, you can date it to 1965 because that's what it is. And that's, I think, what's very interesting in music over the sort of decades is reverb is extreme. It's the most important component, especially in mixing, which is the process when you're putting all the recorded components, all the different instruments and the vocals together. Reverb is essential generally when you're mixing it to give it some kind of mix. But anyway, yeah, I just think it's interesting to sort of like explain that.
I suppose if you wanted to go to kind of Cure comparisons or into kind of something that's maybe a little bit more focused around that, because otherwise we'll be talking about, what sort of chip do you use? The album mix of Close to Me off of, is it In Between Days? Is that what the album's called?
Head on the Door.
Head on the Door.
Head on the Door, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
But I never had titles. So anyway, Close to Me, the album version is completely dry. There is no reverb on it at all.
Yeah.
And that's why it has this effect of being kind of in front of the speakers. So normally what people do, they put echo or they put reverb on hand claps, because hand claps sort of sound like this. If you don't, they just sound a bit pants. Because if you think of most times that you hear hand claps, like Radio Gaga or
Huge.
a big crowd, huge. Whereas like that on Close to Me, you've got no reverb on the hand claps at all. There's one on the left and one on the right, and it's just once. It's not tracked up or anything, which is why kind of when you listen to it, it just sounds like somebody like going like this in your ear.
Yeah.
Well, it's really intriguing
wasn't that also
because. Yeah, go on, Cole.
I was going to say, wasn't that like I think I've heard like Robert talking about how intentional, like he wanted there to be this feeling, like in the music video, like it's in a wardrobe, like reverb can add space and make it sound so big. But I was thinking about how like some tracks that sound so dry, it just sounds very like intimate and close, and it's like, the video, they tried to give the feeling of being, claustrophobic, everyone's close in here and no reverb, and you got the very dry hand claps, and it just sounds like, I mean, I'm in a room right now where I can touch both walls right now. This is one of the tiniest rooms in this house, but it's like, just give a very tiny.
Well, the thing is, when you're in a wardrobe, there's no kind of reverb, is it? Because all the space is like dampened by all the clothing. And Robert said right from the start, before we even did that track, that he wanted it to sound like you were in a wardrobe with someone whispering in your ear. Now that's a very clear production direction. So on that record, we did 14 different drum setups. So each song has got a different drum sound. That one, we went into a little booth in Angel Studios, put up a different kick drum, different snare drum, upturned tom, a tom with a snare drum next to it, a completely small dead room in order to get a completely different sound. So right from and also all of the instruments that were recorded on that were EQ'd to kind of fit without reverb. There was going to be no reverb used to make reverb's often used to make kind of
on Close to Me specifically, or the entire Head on the Door?
No, Close to Me specifically.
Okay.
Night Like This, for instance, would be the reverse.
Yeah, syncing has probably got more
Oh,
reverb on
yeah.
it than anything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
Probably-
there's a different aesthetic going on each song when it comes to, you know, what effect should there be on it, and Close to Me happens to be the driest. But it's just, if you want to have an illustration of what something without reverb sounds like, it's the album version of Close to Me. The single has got a little bit of reverb because obviously it's radio.
right,
Yeah.
right. Well, you know what? I think this is. I kind of want to stay in this zone for a second because of something that actually, because I listened to your interview, Dave, on Electronically Yours, to do my homework for this, and
wow.
there was something that you said to I forgot his name. I'm sorry. Your
Martin
host,
Ware.
Brian
Yeah.
Ware.
Yeah.
Martin Ware, yeah.
Martin Ware. So you were talking about music in general, and it was in the beginning of the podcast, and how songs and music very much is teamwork, even though we, you know, like obviously we're going to spend time talking about The Cure because Carl and I have, you know, that's our
Yeah.
whatever. So a lot of people are like, Robert Smith, Robert Smith, Robert Smith, Robert Smith. And I personally absolutely fucking love Robert Smith. He's great. Everything, but I love the whole band. I love the way that things are recorded. I love the difference in sound between the top. Like, I love going, what the fuck was going on in the top versus Disintegration versus Head on the Door.
Kiss me. Disintegrate. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and
Boom, 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 boom.
I know less technically than all three of you do about music production, right? But I know more than a lot of the people who are listening right now. So what I want to do is I'm going to go back to what you were saying about when Robert said, I want this to sound like blah, blah, and explain to the people who know less about music production, you know, what you do, like in that area as a producer and an engineer. Like, you know, what, because people might just think, I know we could talk like 12 hours about this stuff, but it still all goes into why it funnels back into why you made in the past and why it's so interesting and why it's dear to, I'm assuming it's dear to your heart in some way, or maybe it was just an experiment. I don't know.
Absolutely is.
Yeah.
No,
So
well, going back to in the past is also like kind of comes from the kind of period where I was sort of thinking about, it's all about, it's kind of communication with machines, because it's kind of the around 2006, 2007 when I kind of got into this, and I was starting to look for ways of communicating with the artificial intelligence that has evolved in the web. I'm not talking about the one that human beings have built, LLMs or anything like that. I glibly and rather rubbishly called it the interworm. But I'm also kind of really into interspecies communication as well. And I was trying to think about how the hell you would make a piece of music that could communicate with whales, for instance. So there's a whole load of other kind of bollocks that goes along with it. Going back to the Cure questions.
well, it's really more about explaining to.
Well, no, I think kind of like I think that when an artist gives somebody who's producing or engineering clear direction, right? Clear direction. I want this to sound very dry, in your face. If they give you can find lots of examples where Bowie would say something like, "Oh, I want this to sound like, I don't know, a bunch of roses that have been dipped in paint." Now, what the fuck does that mean? Or the Grateful Dead engineer, they basically went into studios and they said, "Well, man, we want to hear the sound of dead air. Can you get me the sound of dead air?" And the first guy said, "Yeah, I can get you the sound of dead air." And he found like a kind of completely dead place in the studio, stuck a mic there, turned up the volume and went, "Look, man, there's dead air. Have another tab." You know, he got the gig, didn't he? Because it's understanding what somebody, if somebody says like, "Oh, I want this really jangly kind of like guitar sound that's sort of," I mean, Blood of Christ, for instance, on that album, that's like a flamenco guitar part. there's all these kind of different things. But if somebody says, well, I want this to sound, there's many people who have what they like to call vision of a sound, right? Which they then try to say, oh, I've got this vision of a sound. Can you get me this vision? Now, a vision's fucking pretty much impossible to get. But if somebody says, I've got this idea for a sound, or this whole song is about, should sound like this, and it's something as clear as somebody talking into your ear. You're in a wardrobe. Well, I mean, I don't know if I've ever been in a wardrobe with someone whispering in my ear. I definitely haven't. I mean, the only times I've been have been escaping jealous husbands, and I've been in there on my own. And but I could imagine exactly what he meant, that dead sound. When you stick your head in a wardrobe because you've got something at the back of it, it's just like, Christ, the outside world disappears.
Right.
And one of the things I think is really great about Robert's talent is that he can kind of do shit like that. He can precisely identify a feeling that everybody's kind of had in some way or another and turn it into something that's really got an emotional resonance. It's kind of really, I mean, and also like with that sort of direction, you've done the drums, you're doing the bass, where you're not going to stick low, you're going to have something kind of warm. You're not going to have some sort of clangy kind of bass going on. There. You're going to have something boom, boom, because you want something that's going to survive. So it all, in that particular case, it all led from that direction. And that was just really to give people the difference between something like Sinking, which has just got like loads of reverb on it and loads of delays. Bit like, well, how do they ever do in movies when someone's drowning or dying? They make the whole backing track go, whoa,
Yeah. I mean, that's
fading away into.
When I listen to in the past, a whole narrative starts. Like I just start, I can just imagine some kind of story, because there's a story in the sound for me, because it's one long track, and like you said,
yeah.
I'm going to misquote you. You didn't say it's not music, but it's not like we were talking about earlier. It's not like, oh, it's a, chorus, verse, and we can dance around.
Sure, yeah.
Right?
But it's going somewhere, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's going somewhere.
Sorry. I don't think Dave was being glib. I think he was being funny, but, it fits perfectly into modern electronic ambient music from, somewhere between Music Concrete from Pierre Henry, and some of Eno's work, and right up to sort of Autarka or Seafeel or Aphex Twin from Warp. I mean, it is solid ambient music.
Well, the interesting thing is, I think, is that it's not an instrument.
Yeah.
I mean, last night I went to Cafe Otto and saw Roedelius, which is actually really quite hard to say, and he was doing a three. He's like kind of pretty much the father of the great grandfather of krautrock. He's been there all the way through. Born in 1934, he's still playing. So for someone like me, who's like a mere 70, it's like absolutely brilliant to go see someone still putting it out there, And he was really good. He was playing piano. And because he'd been there for a 3-day residency, he was doing an improvisation with, and I might get this wrong, a guy called Tim Story and a guy called Chris Chaplin. Now, they were both playing modern, laptop-based kind of, stuff. But they were actually still playing keys. They're still instruments. They're still playing samples that are in their computer. Whereas this is kind of like a piece of music that's been played in something that was never, or been made in something that was never designed to be an instrument. It's not an instrument. So I don't really know what it is. I mean, it is kind of pretty unique, because I don't know anyone who's bonkers enough to do it. I mean, for instance, most people would take an ambient sound and then put that into an effects box, and the result of the effects box would be the sound that you're listening to on an Eno record, for instance.
So take a sound of like a spoon dropping, put it into an effects box.
Yeah. Take the sound of the spoon dropping, put it into a delay so it goes click-clink, 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 or a loop pedal where basically it just goes forever. I mean, unless you put something into a loop pedal, there's nothing there. Whereas this is somehow sound that's made out of the internal workings of a machine. And if it was any better, if the Lexicon 480L was any better, in other words, if it wasn't noisy, you wouldn't get anything because there'd be nothing for it to feed back on.
So
it's kind of like...
Somebody asked, actually, since you're talking about this, seeing this person live, they asked if you could play in the past live.
No.
No.
Sadly. I mean, I could do a performance of it. Like I'm doing that in the video. The little trailer video. Where...
Dave doesn't know that there's a tour booked for next March.
If only there was.
Right.
You could.
Careful what you wish for.
No, you could. I guess you could do something, but I can't remember what I did. So I can simulate it. But as I say, it's one of 30, and I like that one. There are others. There are about 4 or 5 that were really usable. Some of them were just like a load of bollocks. I don't know if that's any real different. If there's any real difference between, you know, just jamming something on the guitar that you record on, you know, on a cassette. I know lots of people who write like that. Basically, every day they'll just play some guitar onto a cassette, for instance, and then at the end of a month, or when they need a song, they'll listen through to the cassette and they go, well, actually, that's quite a good riff. They'll throw most of it away. But it's a sort of writing thing. And I could definitely do a performance on it, but I wouldn't want to be honest, because it's really dangerous.
What's really dangerous?
Well, it's just like, I mean, if you don't control the feedback or you make a mistake, you're going to just get a really fucking horrible noise, which will be very loud and break someone's hearing. I mean, you know, it's like...
Yeah. Everyone would have to sign a waiver going in.
Yeah, it's different in the studio because you've always got a volume knob, and I don't know. I wouldn't like to do that kind of live because it's too unpredictable.
I see.
I know loads of people. I know quite a lot of people who've got tinnitus from going to gigs.
I have tinnitus. It was from a car accident.
Yeah. Oh, I know loads of people. They've just gone to a gig and they've just been in the wrong place, and it's like you get a free kick drum or something like, or a lead gets pulled out, and you just get a transient. I wouldn't go on stage as a sound person without like ear defenders on, you know, like kind of the stuff that attenuates everything by 20 dB, because you don't know if there's just going to be a power cut or something like that. So no, I wouldn't really want to do that. It makes my job sound really dangerous, doesn't it?
Right. Carl, what were you gonna say?
Oh no, I just think it's so interesting. This, like, because I've had this limited mindset of you have your effects, any sort of processor that takes a sound that goes into it and does something to it, but the concept of that, the thing that does something to something else being the only thing, the effects processor,
totally.
And it's like when you talk about noise, like, because like, so I've moved to the UK, and part of it's just been like over time I used to have my little home studio, and now that I'm settled here, you know, I will gradually begin rebuilding a home studio, which means buying devices. And I've always heard of what do you call it, like just the device noise. And when people are getting like I've got this old Apogee Duet 2 audio interface to get sound into my computer, it has noise, you know, and everyone, you know, whenever I'm like trying to get, you know, what is the best audio interface, and people are like, well, this one has no noise or very little noise. And just the thought that actually the device having noise could turn into something so cool. And you know, I've also, you know, one of the only things I've kept are all like my pedals, you know, all my reverbs and delays and stuff. And now it's like, what could I turn on? Not plug anything really into, you know, I don't need to plug a guitar or what, you know, just to mess around and see what comes out of that, you know.
Well,
I don't know, just that.
what you'd have to do is you'd have to stack a whole bunch of stuff. That was the point of the Sisters of
Yeah.
Mercy story. I don't know if you saw that, but
No, missed
essentially
it.
there was a big rack at Strawberry North of equipment that never really got used or turned on, and in the kind of around that period of time, you used to encounter this in many studios. They'd have, you know, they'd go extensive outboard equipment, and you'd get there and there'd be all this shit outboard equipment that never got turned on and never got used. And on that record, I basically took all of that stuff, turned it all on, went, oh God, well, I don't know what that does. Some of it was compressors, some of it was reverb, some of it was like stupid stuff. Plugged each one into, you know, one into the other, because you could do that in a patch bay off to the side of the desk. You'd have like all those units would come up in the patch bay. You could just take a little lead, plug out into in, out into in, so on and so forth, then bring it back to the desk. And I mean, that all did definitely make a noise. When you then sent it back to the start of the chain, it all made a noise, because you've not just trying to feed back one box, you're trying to feed back, or you are feeding back like a whole bunch of stuff, some of which is compressing the sound, some of which is reverbing it. They've all got different noises, or different noise thresholds. You definitely do get something like that, because it's the start of Some Kind of Stranger. That is what you get. Because the second version, I explained that the first version never followed the drum machine because it was too slow. The second version is recorded at the end of the first version. So what you hear at the start of the track on the record is the tail end of 5 or 6 minutes of feedback machinery.
I might have to repeat that like 10 times.
Well, I don't know what I was thinking about this the other day, and I don't know why I just didn't put the feedback stuff from that track onto a piece of quarter inch and relay it on. But I think the fact that Andrew said he didn't like it just made me think, oh well, there's no point fucking doing that. You know, what's the point of doing that? But that is definitely what could have been done at the time.
So I have I have tons of questions coming in on YouTube, and guess what band they're based around. But so one small question, meaning like I think it might be a yes or no, I don't know, is from Thierry, says, does creativity get lost in plugins versus real stuff? That's the easier question, maybe. I don't know what that means.
Well, I don't know what it means, but
we know like software plugins, like you.
There's definitely a difference between mixing manually on a desk with faders as opposed to using a mouse.
Okay, is that
because a mouse is like basically one hand, one click point. You can't manipulate. For instance, the little video that I do with the Lexicon alphanumeric remote control, there's like all these different sliders. There's 6 sliders, so you can kind of use you're fiddling about with 6 things simultaneously, plus the stuff on the desk. You've got 10 fingers. When the Beatles used to do mixes, they used to rehearse the mixes, and they'd have 4 people sitting at the desk doing all of that stuff simultaneously. Whereas a lot of mixing nowadays is done point and click with a mouse. So it does affect creativity. In fact, in some respects, it makes things take a lot longer. And also it's hard to, makes it more kind of solo. So yeah, it does affect creativity. The other problem with plugins is they all have an analog simulation on nowadays, which is a sort of simulated noise. And I say turn it off, because what's the point of that? It's not real. It's just a simulation. So you want to have loads of kind of white noise all over the front of your mix that isn't really anything other than a simulated pretend, oh, I'm an analog machine. I mean, it's almost like kind of fetishism, really. So I say turn them off. Otherwise, what you've got to do, if you've got sort of like a solo guitar that brings your song in, and you've got lots of plugins with the analog thing in, you have to mute all those tracks. Doesn't matter whether there's any digital signal there. You've got the plugin. The plugin is making this noise all the time. You need to mute it, which is going back to like 1983, where you'd have to mute everything and only bring it in when it came in because of the noise created by the tape.
Well,
that just seems a bit stupid.
So if you, so if you're talking about, you know, like I'm just thinking about what you were saying about what you like about the Lexicon and the music that you're making out of something that's not a musical instrument.
Not an instrument, yeah.
And then a lot of the questions are coming in about, obviously, about The Cure and your work on The Cure. And somebody asked if you could go through every single, you know, thing you've worked on and like analyze it and blah, blah. And I know we don't have time for that, but you just mentioned.
Well, I wouldn't be able to remember because it's not like sort of you can sit there and like, I mean, it's not like being Oppenheimer.
Sure.
But you're just kind of going, oh, I need some sort of, I need to kind of distance this instrument or put it into some sort of space. But you don't sit and agonize kind of over what that is. And sometimes you'll just be using whatever you've got because there's a whole bunch of boxes that do basically the same thing. Just the same as there's a whole bunch of plugins that do the same thing. So
but when you were talking about 83 though, with the top, I was just thinking about the top in 84 and how.
Well, I inherited the top. So just going into the top, the drum sound and the drum and the bass was recorded by a guy called Howard Gray, who later on manifested himself in Apollo 440. I don't know what he's doing nowadays. And he was allegedly the guy who developed the sound in Townhouse 4. He was the assistant on Metal Box, and also the Phil Collins record, In the Air Tonight. I mean, Hugh Padgham got all the credit.
Wow.
But the word at the time was that Howard Gray was the man for drums at Townhouse. And so those big drum sounds, like on the top, I inherited that. I'm a fraud, you know. I inherited that.
Well, wait, hold on. Brett, let's. So Robert Smith wrote most of the music for the top, right? I mean, that's
yeah, he played most of the instruments.
So he's at home and he's working on his demos, or he's in his studio. He's on his little, you know, cardboard boxes.
I think he was working his ass off. Like, yeah, I don't know how he was doing it because he was in the Banshees at the time, so he must have been absolutely fucked.
Right. So then
he was working all the time.
He comes to this person who worked on PIL and Phil Collins. Is that right?
Yeah.
And he does, and this person, I forgot his name already, does some of the work.
Howard Gray.
And you inherited it. But
well, yeah, he turned up at the studio with pretty much with Andy Anderson, my little joke. Andy Anderson turned up at the studio with the tapes of the top, drums and bass. And then we finished and then we did all the other overdubs and did all the singing and all that sort of stuff. But basically backing tracks of just interesting drum and bass. Which is probably quite good because that meant that all that Howard had to do, I mean, you imagine you're a guy, you're working in the studio and a band come in and they just want to do drums and bass. I mean, you're bound to kind of think, well, I can do this with it and I can do that with it. And he'd recorded a lot of the effects. So
he recorded them probably live also, right? I mean, like we were talking about the spoon, because you didn't have the Lexicon then. What did you have then?
I don't know what he used. I wasn't there. That's what I'm saying.
mean-
I'm a fraud. I go just
No, but I mean,
completely
you were talking-
inherited.
in that era of like when you're talking about reverb and
Yeah, no,
radio-
what I'm trying to say is that Howard had a reputation for being great at recording drums already, even though he was not a main engineer at Townhouse. But everybody kind of knew the goss was, oh, he's fucking great at doing drums. He's great. Did Scritti Politti after that. And so, some people, we had a forte for it. Everyone kind of knew. They really loved that kind of pill drum sound. It was all Studio 4 at Townhouse. Japanese studios came and copied it. They measured it and copied it and built versions of it in Japan. There's a studio in Basque Country that's very, very similar to Studio 4 at Townhouse called Tio Pete. Got the same stone wall, same architect. It was like a very successful kind of design. So I guess Robert had loads of kind of bass and drum ideas, and then later on fleshed them up into being kind of proper songs. Caterpillar.
Very cool.
But
What-
I
what-
have
one
no
thing I'm
idea
curious about-
Yeah, go on.
Oh, and I was just going to say, with your work on The Cure, earlier we mentioned how like Robert was very clear about, I want a dry, claustrophobic, intimate
Yeah.
sound. And how some people come in and say, I want something that sounds like Roses or something jangly. And in your role, you find a way to translate that into what they hear. Do you ever get artists that you work with who actually make a Cure reference? Hey, I want like a kiss me, kiss me, kiss me bass sound, or I mean, and I'm sure you're working with like,
I have had
yeah,
I have had in the past, no pun intended. That's just a bit. I don't know. The thing is, in the 21st century, that's really been the go-to thing.
Mhm.
So
What
if
do
you
you
take
mean?
someone like
I
Mark
see.
Ronson, his whole kind of thing is like imitating. It's going to sound very critical of his work, and I don't really want to be critical because he's a kind of a bit of a genius. But like from Amy Winehouse all the way through, it's kind of, well, let's use a bit of this stack drum sound. We'll have a bass sound from here. The best example is like Bruno Mars, where it's like cameo bass drum, Prince keyboards. You can kind of identify which era he's taking all of his classic sounds from. But to be able to do that really well as he does is a kind of work of genius. So it's all kind of moved into that kind of area now. As opposed to bespoke sounds or making your own sounds. So I'd say that in the 20th century, when people said that, I'd like to get this Robert Smith guitar sound, I'd go, well, where is he then? Better get him in here. Because,
Yeah, right.
like, what's the fucking point in that? I mean, you've got an identity of your own. What do you mean? You want a Robert Smith guitar sound
Yeah.
or a Simon Gallup
Yeah.
bass, and it doesn't even exist. I mean, what's the
Right.
similarity, say, with Simon between the bass on, Screw and the bass on Close to Me? I mean, what identity is there sonically? Or between Catch and Torture, or between Love Song and Disintegration? The song Disintegration.
So
I mean,
what?
an interesting one on we could just sort of, yes, Arusha.
No, go ahead about Disin.
Well,
Because
like the song, it has this kind of sequencer that comes in, like about halfway through. And I have to say that I'm not quite sure the mix generation, what mix that is, because the assistant engineer and engineer on Disintegration, when we were mixing at Rack, was a guy called Roy Spong. And I think he did other mixes after I'd left, after I'd stopped working on the project. I think Robert went back in, did some recall mixes with Roy Spong. Now, halfway through Disintegration, what comes in is what sounds like a sequencer. which is the digga-ligga-digga-ligga-digga-digga. You've got the B line, you've got all the melodic lines, but there's a sort of thing that sounds like a sequencer, and it's not. It's reverb, and it's reverb that's been gated to the hi-hat. That's another
Halfway
technical
through.
kind of... Yeah, about halfway through.
I don't know if I ever
It's
noticed
been
that.
there. You've never noticed it.
I get distracted by the freaking glass breaking. On that song. Love the song.
Mm.
I just want to share, like, while we have questions coming through, there are also just people giving very positive comments. And I've got a Luki, I'm probably going to butcher this, but I've got a Luki Marsongko saying the Cure's albums were definitely better with David Allen as producer. And they have some few things to say about, like, Wild Mood Swings and onwards. But, you know, people have what they like, and just wanted to share the share the love there.
Share the love, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's all an imponderable, isn't it? It really is an imponderable. I mean, you know, was the first atom bomb the best atom bomb, or was the H bomb better than, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know.
The last one might be the best one. I don't know.
I don't really want to. I don't know. It's just it's really awkward because, you know, can you tell whether the artist is on file or the whole thing is, the time is right? I mean, you can't really. I was talking to somebody last night at Cafe Otto and kind of going, you know, you can't really tell. Anyone could have probably done all that stuff. Yes, it was a very purple patch for everybody. I think what you got there. One of the reasons why I mean, obviously, I like to possibly delude myself about this, but it's everybody being great, all at the right moment, all at the right time. And I'm including with that, like the marketing guy was a guy called Nigel Revler. He was head of marketing at Polydor. He was really absolutely brilliant at his job. Chris Parry was just absolutely brilliant. I mean, look at all the other acts he signed. He really knew, he really had an idea about where he wanted to take the Cure. He always used to go on to me, he thought they should be as big as Pink Floyd. That was his ambition for them. You know, you've got I don't know, there's a lot of stuff that is all reaching a peak there. And
but that sort of goes into, I keep thinking about what you were talking about with this track in the past, and then you were also saying that you have this Lexicon 480L that you know, mess about with, and you make however many tracks, and you're like, oh, that one's on the floor, that one's middle, that one's, you know, maybe you have a coloring system at home, I don't know. But what we're talking about in the bigger picture is that two things, I think. One is that even on a record, music is not only the players, not only the people that wrote it, but the people that recorded it, the people in the engineering room. Does the engineering room have, you know, like you also talked on your podcast about, like, are there people yapping in the room? Like, how much focus it is? Is it 1989? Is it 2001? Did the towers just fall? Is it 1986, you know, near the you know, Chernobyl? I mean, I'm getting very meta, but something I appreciate about talking with you, Dave, is that I feel like your perception of life, at least in our brief conversations that we've had with each other, shows up in the way that you appreciate music, the way that you produce sounds, clearly the way that you receive the information from the artist. Because I can imagine some producers, I mean, I don't know, I've never made a record, but maybe some producers are dicks. Maybe some producers don't listen to the artist. Maybe some producers have grandfathered in. So I think there is something important to say about your work with The Cure.
Yeah.
You know, even though it was a space and time and this
Well,
and that.
in some ways, the great divide in producers over the years. I thought, well, this is kind of, oh, like, God, it's just really kind of sweeping generalizations. But there are lots and lots of producers who don't give a fuck about words. and there's a lot of people who think a lot about music. And I don't really think very much about music at all. Or I don't think you can make a classic song or a classic track without classic words. If you're going to use words, I mean, you can make a classic track without words, obviously. But if you're in song-based forms, the words have to be great. They don't have to be complicated, but they have to be great. And it's really hard to do that. It's really hard to be great and simple. Pop music is the greatest art form in music, I think, because at its greatest, it's deep, it's profound, it's stupid, it's simple. It's a whole lot of things on a whole lot of levels. It's very complicated to do that, and it's very complicated to plan it, engineer it, build it, because sometimes, you know, it can't sound like that. It just has to be like, for instance, Pharrell Williams and Happy. Now, he wrote that for a movie. There's no way that you could write that song for yourself, that any artist could think, well, I'm going to write a song about being really fucking happy. I mean, it just wouldn't fucking work. But he could write it for a movie.
Wait, which song?
I don't know if that really helps, like from...
Is this the 'Cause I'm Happy? That one?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Now, you couldn't actually write something like that for yourself, because you just think, well, fucking hell, that's just a pile of wank. But you could write it for a movie, and that's just like a massive song, isn't it? But you couldn't write it for yourself. So, you know, some of the things which... that's a bad example, but going back to kind of the Great Divide... going back to the Great Divide in producers, their producers don't care about words. It's got to have a hook, it's got to have a tune, it's got to have this, it's got to have that.
The formula.
But it doesn't really matter about the words. The words don't matter. And kind of maybe, and in kind of pop music terms, maybe they're right. They are right. I can't imagine Stott Aitken and Waterman ever fucking worried about the words. Well, I don't believe Pete Waterman ever worried about the words. Just not that sort of kind of guy.
There's the side of selling, right? I guess, I don't know, that, you know, to make something sellable, which...
Well, and that's one of the things I loved about in the past was the not having words, just because lately I myself, so I've moved here and I always have words in my head. I've always got headphones in. I'm either listening to podcasts or I'm listening to music with words that's putting images and kind of like putting thoughts. And that was what was so nice to listen to in the past. It was like a sort of like a mental cleanse for a moment. I was just in this music with my thoughts and just like it was just interesting the way, without words being forced into my head via podcasts or music with lyrics, listening to in the past, no words, just these sonic sounds and atmospheres, and there are points where the music is like kind of like unsettling, you know, and it was just kind of like, it was just, I don't know, like freshly stimulated versus like when you're constantly listening to words via podcasts or songs with lyrics. But
I mean, it's a bit like the punk style of songwriting, where it's basically verse, chorus, turn right at the middle eight, verse, chorus to fade.
Right.
And we get really fucking sick of that A B C A B B B format, although it's very tried and tested and still works. For instance, trying to find some new flip on that. It's exactly the same old stuff, but trying to find something where you think, Christ, I've never really heard that before, but it is exactly that structure.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the genius of some pop musicians, and continues to be so, although I'm not in the demographic anymore to consume that.
Talking about the formula, wasn't that one of the risks with Paranoid Android by Radiohead, where they didn't have, you know, the whole like A B C B, or, you know, it's like, because there was no there was, you know, it's just it came out as a single, which was
that keeps coming in. Sorry.
But it's just it came out. It was a single, and it didn't fit that whole, you know, typical verse chorus formula.
Well, I don't know. I mean, Radiohead pop?
Yeah.
Oh no. I wasn't. Yeah, I wasn't talking about punk. I was talking about. Well, I was talking more just like formulas.
Well, yeah, I know, but I mean, I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I'm talking about
Yeah.
kind of mainstream. I don't know. Does any of it exist anymore? But the sort of stuff that I don't know. What are Radiohead? Are they? They're not really a kind of pop band. They're not a rock band. They're not a grunge band. They're some sort of art band. I don't really
Yeah.
know very much about them. I sort of kind of. There's the first album with Creep,
Mhm.
which is verse, chorus, turn right at the middle eight,
Yeah.
verse, chorus, and then there's the bends. Is that right?
Oh,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know a little bit about Radiohead if you know that much, right? That's the first 2 records.
Well, I know that, like, basically John Leckie recorded like the bends, and then it was all mixed and edited in LA by Slade and Courtney or something. So who nipped and tucked it. That was then that's basically in the days where it's still on tape. So
I mean,
when the-
that's what I think the takeaway from this conversation and your work in the past is about is that it's recorded on this thing. Like that's what we're talking about. It's like it's a thing that's not
it's a thing.
It's a thing, man, and Andy's in the dark.
Yeah.
He's in
It's
the
not a
dark.
guitar.
Man.
It's not a keyboard. It's not an instrument. It's
And Dave
it's
Ellis
just,
It
says,
exists.
Dave Ellis says, I'd like to congratulate David for his job on Strange Times by the Chameleons. He picked up the twin guitar sound of Reg and Dave perfectly.
Well, thank him very much. Thank you very much, Dave Ellis. Yeah. Actually, that's the sound on that record is a bit of a precursor for Disintegration.
Is it? I love both.
Oh,
of them.
interesting.
I think so, yeah. Yeah.
Do
All right.
tell.
Nice. And there's an example of a band where they all 4 members were too talented for each other, really. I mean,
What do you,
know,
so what do you mean about Strange Times as a precursor to Disintegration? Because that the Chameleons are a band
it's got
that
the big drum sound. It's got the, it's just, it really is heading towards that kind of swampy sound. I don't know. Maybe it's it's very difficult to kind of be aware of this, but maybe it's my fingerprint, my watermark. Because people tell me that they can tell
I mean
that.
it's I
can't tell that, but maybe it's that I'm hearing.
Could you compare?
But that's a very great record, Marg. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, could you compare, like when you said swamp thing? There is a sound. There are sounds like for a person that's not a musician, at least for me, I've played music. I can't consider myself a musician. I played in a band. But there's sounds in Disintegration or on Strange Times, and there's actually a very specific guitar sound on the records in Strange Times that I'm like, how the fuck did they get that sound? And it might be something that you and people finishing the record did. But so what do you mean by swampy?
Well, it's really. Oh, it's just like with the Chameleons. Dave and Reg are very, very different players. I think. I don't know. I think a lot of it is taking people really seriously about what they want to do and actually talking, sort of kind of going, well, how do you see all this kind of like working out? What's this guitar part about? Or where do you see it coming from? Or is this all right? Or, wow, you're playing an SG and Dave's playing a Strat. What amps go with that? Pairing stuff. I don't know. Maybe there's a lot of it's asking questions and not being like, oh, this is my idea for what the guitars should be like. This is my idea for what the guitar. What? How the fuck are these 2 guitars going to go together? I mean, there's impositional producers. I mean, you imagine if you go to Mutt Langer, who's what, Shania Twain, Foreigner, AC/DC, Def Leppard. I mean, he spent 18 months teaching Joe Elliott how to sing Pyromania.
Wow.
I mean,
Right.
he's a fucking great guitarist. He can play all the guitars. He'd be teaching people how to play the guitar parts. I mean, there are producers on that level where actually they're the kind of main. I mean, possibly Trevor Horn's one of those sort of people. His records sound the way they sound because he records them once, he records them twice, then he records them a third time until they're absolutely perfect, which is partly like that. I mean, it's very, you know what I mean? There's all sorts of different production styles, and
I think if I just jump in on to add to what Dave's saying, and swampy is a word that he's used with me before talking about some of those records, and I think Disintegration is a case in point in that it was almost a kind of, in a lot of the tracks, a kind of keyboard driven album, and when you're recording keyboards, before you're even mixing, the sound and the substance of what you're putting onto tape or into a computer, whatever, is huge already, because a lot of the things are recorded in stereo. One keyboard sound will, you're going to spend the rest of the time trying to work out how you're going to be able to sort of cut into it and put other things into it. And then obviously there was the big drum sound. So if you've got a big drum sound and then you've got like 2 keyboard tracks, the thing is almost full up. I mean, that's why obviously I think Robert probably made a very intelligent decision in his songwriting to go just very sparse 6-string bass here and there and whatever. It wasn't like, Paul had to step back. There wasn't a lot of space for a lot of things, else it does become very, very muddy very, very quickly. And I think that also it people talk about it as a masterpiece, it's majestic, whatever. I mean, it starts with frigging Plain Song, which is just, and it could be called swampy or it could be called timeless. I think it's the same coin, but each side. Swampy, timeless, and it's mainly, but I think because it's a keyboard-driven album. But I can see the comparison with Strange Times, because the drum sounds definitely there.
Yeah, it's also kind of well, there's a funny sort of link, isn't there? Because it's like, it's me and Mark Saunders. But there's like a combination of personalities there. Mark's the engineer on Strange Times and did all the remixes, the single remixes for Disintegration. And Next Wish.
Yeah, I mean, that's another gem for people who don't really understand a lot about what goes into music production. And I'm getting a lot of thank yous on the YouTube about just, again, enlightening people to the work that goes into making a record on all these levels. There's been a lot of questions about Wish. Carl, do you have one on your channel about Wish from Lukey, I think?
No. So I just had Thierry, which you asked. Thierry also asked on YouTube, and then there was Lukey, who was basically just giving praise.
Okay, so I have
Praise Jesus.
I just have love this. Robert Smith talks about his Disintegration and Wish sounding lush and atmospheric. It's very evident in Trust. How much of your production goes into giving the songs that lush atmospheric feel? And can you comment on the difference between Kiss, this is a big question, Kiss Me, Disintegration, and Wish, because you worked on all 3. They're all different, so I don't know what you want to tackle out of that.
Well, the obvious answer is it's kind of different man, different river. So not only were things invented kind of in the passage of time, the band were in a different place. Different amounts of money were available to do stuff. More time could be taken. So I don't know. If I was to say that I'd kind of like knew everything when I started doing the top, then I could kind of say, oh, well, this one was this, and this one was that, and this one was the other, because I kind of knew what I was doing. But seeing as I never really kind of knew what I was doing, and I was just constantly trying to make it up as I went along, as was everybody else. The best example of that is, like, obviously, he didn't go and write 100 songs in 1981 and then proceed to record them through to 1990. He kind of wrote songs as he went. People made up the guitar parts as they went. They did the engineering and the production as they went, and the mastering and the mixing as they went along. So there isn't like a common mentality between any of it. Whoever it is, there's not a common mentality, because your mentality doesn't change when you're 25. Sorry, your mentality does change. You're 25, you go on a world tour, you have big hits. 2 years later, you're writing songs, you've come back, you're not the same person, are you? You are, obviously, but you're not really. And then if you have 2 kids, you're not the same person after that. And then if you have an amputated leg, you're not the same person after that. I mean, so on and so forth.
And then you become an Edward Gorey cartoon, and then you're not the same anymore.
Yeah, well, you could, or simplistically, you could read a book that changes your life. Sure. Or you could hear a piece of music from another artist that you think, wow, blimey, that's just blown me away. That's just,
I feel like I feel like a song just came up here about, this happens, you're not the same after that. Then this happens, you're not the same after that. I think the band Damagement should put that out.
The band Damagement, yeah.
Damagement. Yeah. The band manager, In the Dark. Oh wait, the producer.
I think.
The record
I think
label.
If I can just jump in again quickly, what? How can I say this? A lot of these records that were made, I mean, Dave and others who worked on some of these records that are now deemed to be classics, I think, because a big reason for that is there was a lot of care that went into them in the way that, for example, if we're talking about reverb and the Lexicon on Disintegration, it wasn't probably the only one. Whereas, as we were saying before, where music can be definitively dated by stuff like reverb, like you can tell a pop hit from '87 or whatever. If people put time and care from songwriting onwards, right through to the final production and mix process, by using lots of different equipment in lots of different ways, you generally end up with something which will stand the test of time 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the line. And that's, I think, the big difference. I mean, I love pop music. I'd even say, I love some of Kylie Minogue stuff. I mean, it's addictive. But you just know those guys were in a room for 2 afternoons knocking them out. And there was one digital reverb, and there was one this and one that. That's why it kind of could be called formulaic. Whereas,
it's Tamla Motown, though, isn't it? That whole idea is Tamla Motown. So and Tamla Motown did make some fucking absolutely amazing, great classic records.
Absolutely. And you could, but not to criticize any period of the Cure or whatever, but it could be argued that there are some records that they made where access to cheap new technology, computer technology, has taken out some sort of ingredients of a quite longer process using rather more more heavy artillery and whatever. And this goes for any band that's lasted for that long. I mean, there are brilliant Depeche Mode records, and there are less brilliant Depeche Mode records if you're a fan of Depeche Mode. And a lot of that can come down to the time taken in production, the amount of equipment used, the amount of, as Dave said, the amount of budget.
I think everybody always tries to do their best. I think there's a very common perception that people just don't give. They make an album that everyone says, "Well, this album's a bit shit." They just think that everybody was just like loafing about doing fuck all. But I don't think that's true at all. I think everybody's really busting their ass to make something great because their names are on it. They've got to front it. They've got to rehearse it. You know, and it might manifest itself to the public that it's a poor album or the songs are weak. But I don't think. I mean, the famous one is Bowie, isn't it? And his three album cycle, where the first album's great, the next album. He signed a 3-album deal with various companies, and he did this repetitiously. Where the first album was great, returned to form. The second album was kind of all right, and the third album was a bit weak. But I don't even know if that's really fair to Bowie.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point because what you're talking about is time, money, right, and art, and art in its purest form shouldn't be measured. It really shouldn't be, to me. It just is. And people who create art, whether you're the lyrics, the producer, the you know, the engineer, the person making the art form, you know, it's something that we all do because we fucking have to, or we're gonna lose our goddamn minds, right? I mean, at least it is for me, and I know I'm a person that I do things that that's never going to see the light of day. Nobody's ever going to see it. And so I think what you said is really important because a lot of people don't understand that, like, yes, some people get very lucky with their first record, or like Daniel Johnston, you know, who is a gifted mentally ill person. You know, Speedy Motorcycle is a great record and then somebody else produced it, or it's a great song to some people. But that's exceedingly lucky. That's exceedingly lucky, where there's like millions of people just putting out stuff and they're rushed and they got to get it done, and they don't have Dave Allen, the producer, or Dave Allen's there, but you don't have the time, right? You don't have the money. So I really appreciate you saying that because I think it is true. I mean, maybe there's some people just getting sloshed in the studio who just want to put out a record because they can, but.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, the whole thing is that basically, if anyone really kind of knew, I guess there are people who know how to make hit records, but there are very few with 100% records going back over the years. Well, very few.
Possibly.
Yeah, so Andy,
I don't know. Anyway, this has moved into imponderables here, so.
Well, I was going to bring it back to the past.
Just moving back to in the past.
Yeah.
I'd just like to announce, we will be announcing this officially, but just give you first dibs on this. There's going to be a remix competition, and I thought that I should mention it here because of the quick conversation about Carl saying it was very refreshing not to have any lyrics or singing on it. People will be allowed to sing on it if they so wish in any remix that they might. They can put Gregorian chanting on it if they so wish, or whatever. So yeah, we will be announcing.
Hell yeah!
That. So anybody will be able.
You promised me the grandma. You said they could use their grandmothers on it.
Yeah. They can get your granny singing on it.
Nice.
Record people in the street, pick it up, sample it, play ragtime piano on it, whatever. So we'll be announcing that soon, so people will be able to download it. I mean, obviously, it is a one-off stereo file. There are no different parts to it. It is what it is. So you'll just have to take this sausage of sound and put it in your computer and then do what you want.
I'm definitely going to take a swing. That's very exciting. Yeah, I'll definitely take a swing at that and share. Yeah. That's very cool.
And we will professionally master and release the winners that Dave will be deciding on later on in the year.
Oh, work.
Yeah, yes. Well, you're already working on this little beast. all the time, aren't you? According to you do stuff on the Lexicon all the time, right?
I haven't for ages. No, I went through like a very strange. I went through a phase of doing it, which was a bit like kind of, I don't know. I just sort of, I had the hankering to do it. I bought one, and I was just going, wow, this was just like, used to find this really fun,
Yeah, I mean,
and I'm kind of a bit talked out about it, to be honest.
spend all
So,
day in the studio working on
what was that,
stuff, and then
Andy?
you tell us how you actually came to make it. I mean, how did you start making music on the Lexicon? It was just you'd be working all day on sessions, and then you'd kind of unwind in the evening or at night, messing around on it.
Yeah, a band would go home at like sort of 10 or 11 or whatever, and then I'd spend half an hour like fucking about with the Lexicon, recording it, smoking a spliff and drinking a beer.
Yeah.
Nice.
And then, 2 years later, I've got like 30 or 40 completely bizarre pieces of music. And this is kind of the one that I like the most, the one that survived the... Well, Horace, the poet, used to put all of his poetry in a drawer, and then every 5 years, he'd pull out something that he'd written 5 years before and read it and kind of go, is this any good? And then go, no, it isn't, or yes, it is. So it's a bit like Horace the poet, but if he had a Lexicon 480L. Which he obviously
He just
didn't.
pulls out a drawer and there's this little
This
calculator.
was about...
The calculator's
Yeah,
there.
he would have sort of God, if only I had a lark, I would have been able to do this instead of having to write all this poetry, all these odes.
What did you say, Andy? The song
my goodness.
sausage?
Sausage.
Yeah.
Right.
We have an amputee. We have a sausage link, and then we have what did you say, Horace? I don't know. But
Horace, yeah, Horace, the Roman poet, yeah.
So we have a lot, and you've
You
given
have
us
a lot, yeah.
We have a lot, and this has been
Yeah.
super duper fun. Carl, did you have a question before we?
Well, I guess one of the last things, because I don't get to talk to David very often, but we see each other on social media, and you've been accessible. Like if I have a question, you usually will eventually like write back with something amazing and fun. What I'm curious about is a lot of engineers, producers. When they start out, it's like they're oh my God, I got to take any work that I can, but you've worked yourself to a place where I'm sure now it's like, maybe people are just like throwing work at you, and you can be very like selective, like what do I want to work on? And when you are picking projects, like, is there something about them that excites you, or something particularly that excites you about them lately, where you go, oh, this sounds interesting, I'd work on this, or what is it that you like, or that you get excited about, that pulls you to take on a project? Or I don't know if that's for next time.
Well, I don't know, I've retired.
You haven't retired.
Yeah, I
You've
have from that, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, no, I have from
Okay.
that, yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm interested
Gotcha.
in kind of doing pieces of music. I'm interested. I've decided to kind of. I found out quite recently that not quite recently, a couple of years, 3 years ago, that a symphony is 4 pieces of music. So I'm writing a symphony with a friend of mine called Johnny Parry. I've finished
That's cool.
movements 1 and 4, got 2 and 3 to do. I'm more interested. I'm doing a kind of like easy listening bossa nova thing, which is where I'm singing
Right.
female songs, female torch songs, but with a bloke singing them with the sex reversed. That's quite funny, because female torch
That's
songs
cool.
often talk about what they're wearing, which when you sort of put that in a male context, it's just absolutely fucking ridiculous. I've got my fucking tweed suit on, whereas like women
Nice.
often talk about high heels or. I don't know. I'm just doing a few things, but I'm quite interested in that. But I'm not interested in. I don't really have the production thing there anymore. It's like if you talk about a mode, I'm just don't really have it. I mean, it's sort of for a long period of time I had an aesthetic that I could apply to something, and I could find I found a place for myself in other people's music, and now I can't really find that place anymore.
All right. Well,
And
you're creating music, and that's cool.
Yeah, well, I think that's the point. I think in at this stage in Dave's career, I mean, you have to remember he started as an artist. I mean, back at the start in the sort of punk and post-punk period, and I think it's really great that it's kind of going full circle where he's actually having fun making his own music now, or you know, going through some of the things that he's done in his past that he's actually done as an artist. And you know, there's getting it out there, which I think is must be very validating in this part.
So where can people where can people find In the Past right now?
On all the streaming platforms. Yeah, it's out on all the streaming platforms. The video will be dropping probably next week. And then there will be a vinyl, but yeah, it's out there. And obviously the DNA of DMA, which is the collection of Dave's early synth demos from predating the genetic period, is very much out there and still being worked on. So yeah, it's just it's all out there. Enjoy. And as I said, there'll be this remix competition in the past. So people can kind of take it and make it their own and do whatever they want. Make it into that.
That'd be very cool.
Make it into that hidden Disintegration track that never was.
That sounds really fucking cool.
Or or throw that into a Lexicon again.
Right?
Where has Dave gone?
I don't know, but now we can see his his couch and his books and.
What part of the world is he in now? It looks like it's daylight outside, or is that a street light, or is that a? I remember last time we were all together. I was in France. I think Arusha was still in New York City, and you were there in Paris. And you got a stormtrooper looking out behind you. It looks like.
Yeah, he's over
there. Yeah.
But no, that's I think Dave Shepherd's Bush. That's London.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right.
There must be a very bright light on somewhere.
Gotcha.
At this time of the evening.
Some people in the audience are saying, please put the track on Bandcamp. Is it already on Bandcamp?
It will be. It definitely will be, and we'll probably be doing the audio download for the remix competition there. So it will.
Very cool.
It will be on Bandcamp. Yes.
Oh, Dave, you have wine and.
Sorry about that. Nature call.
Sorry to enjoy it. With you.
Hey, that's right.
Sorry about that. It is white wine. Yes.
Oh.
It's a delicate little. Yeah, here we go.
That sounds lovely. Cheers.
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 Brilliant.
On that note.
Yes. Unless anybody wants to say anything else, I was going to go out, Dave, on your piece that you put on Facebook. I have it uploaded. So we'll end on that. Yeah. But
absolutely fabulous, Arusha. Thank you so much.
Big thanks.
Nice, thank you guys. Thank you all. Brilliant. It's always lovely to talk.
Yeah, I got to come up with more excuses for us to get together.
We'll figure something out. This is fun.
Well, as long as Dave keeps on releasing records.
Right. You know what we could do? We could do we could reveal the contest winners on whatever channel you guys want. Da, 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 da.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for
joining David, us. Andy, thank you guys. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for watching.
See you soon.
Take care. Be safe.
Bye,
guys.
See you, Dave.